Hello again, astronauts. Today I will be interviewing Maria Athanassiou. She's a PhD candidate in psychiatry at the Université de Montréal. She's a passionate advocate for science, health education, and promoting diversity in STEM. Her current research focuses on schizophrenia, suicide, and addiction research. Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for agreeing to this interview.
Thank you so much for having me, Astra. It's lovely to be here with you.
Yeah, it is so good to finally meet you, not in person, but over Zoom.
Agreed.
So let's get into your research field, which is, I guess, more broadly, the science of mental health. So what causes mental illnesses like schizophrenia, suicide, or suicidal ideation and addiction?
That is a loaded question if I've ever heard one, simply because that would almost assume that we would know what causes schizophrenia or suicide and addiction. And if I can be very frank with everyone, we definitely haven't found one definitive aspect of any mental health disorder that can be categorically a determinant factor of whether or not a person is going to be able to develop a condition or not. What we do know is that rates of mental health conditions will vary greatly between age, across cultures, across genders. We have the intersectionality between an individual's life experiences as well as their genetic background. So to try to pinpoint an exact cause, which will be definitive, is almost like trying to find a needle in a haystack, if it even exists. But what we do know is that there are certain risk factors that are going to be associated with the chance of developing a condition. So for example, with schizophrenia, we do know that there are certain risk factors such as cannabis abuse, exposure to stressful events in childhood, complications during fetal delivery, even low serum folate levels. And these are some of the most robust information that we find for schizophrenia. On the other hand, for suicide, we do know some of the strongest predictors are previous suicide attempts, previous mental health disorders, even being the male gender, having a prior substance abuse issue, having access to firearms, having multiple medical comorbidities. And even on this level, we do find that there are large variances between ages. So depending on your age, you'll also have different risk factors. On the more addiction side, you'll find individuals that have a stronger pattern of use or that use more potent medication or drugs will also be more likely to develop an addiction. You also have specific characteristics like age or sex or socioeconomic status, which will contribute to the chance of developing addiction, even pre-existing mental health conditions. And of course, you see that this comes up multiple times, but again, having a pre-existing condition also puts you more likely to develop a second one or a third one. And then finally, having motives for specific use, such as sleeping or coping with stress, will also contribute to this addiction risk. But again, these are all preliminary and they continuously evolve as we gather more information across the years. So these are true for this point in time, but they might not necessarily be true maybe tomorrow or the month after if we come up with a brand new discovery that no one has ever found before. But to answer your question shortly, there's no definitive cause, but to answer it in a more lengthy way, I think people should be looking more towards risk factors than actual causes.
And when you say risk factors, those are things that are correlated with developing these disorders, not necessarily causing them. So having one mental health issue might not necessarily cause another mental health issue, but sometimes people have more than one. Is that an accurate interpretation?
So exactly, that's a very close interpretation. So what you would say is an individual, if you take the same individual and one individual will show, for example, for suicide, a previous suicide attempt versus an individual that doesn't have a previous suicide attempt, that person with the previous suicide attempt would be more at risk of developing or completing suicide later on. So if you were to take an equal playing ground, having specific conditions would lead you to a closer estimate of whether or not you would get a mental health disorder or not. But it is definitely not something that's causal in nature, nor is it definitive at this time. Yes.
So scientists are kind of trying to build a picture and identify people who might be more at risk, but aren't necessarily at the point where we can say what causes something. The underlying cause is still unknown.
Absolutely. And I think that for the moment, I don't believe that we're going to be finding definitive causes, simply because the way that we're also diagnosing mental health conditions is continuously evolving. The way that we're characterizing mental health disorders is also continuously evolving. So trying to pinpoint a disorder, but it's always changing and being diagnosed differently, it's almost like chasing something that you're never going to be able to catch. So until we've solidified the way that we're going to be looking at mental health disorders, if we solidify the way that we're diagnosing them, and if we standardize our practices, I think that we're going to be able to find better answers to our questions. But for the moment, it's a lot of exploratory work, I would say.
Yeah. I was actually doing a little very preliminary Googling to kind of prepare for this interview. And it seemed as though personality disorders were kind of X number of these traits. So it wasn't just all people with this personality disorder or this mental illness have all of these traits. It's if you have like 5 of the following 9 symptoms or characteristics, you might have this mental illness or personality disorder. I also noticed a significant overlap between mental illnesses and personality disorders, and things had changed. So I can see.
Yes, those are just excellent points, because what you'll find is that mental health disorders will all fall in a specific continuum. So you'll have a continuum of behaviors, and this cutoff of what is typical behavior and atypical behavior is subjective in nature, and it is almost socially constructed. And what you'll find is that these mental health disorders will also overlap. So I'll give you an example. For individuals that are schizophrenia, that will take an autism screening questionnaire, 52% of them will be caught by this autism questionnaire. However, they don't fall on the autism spectrum. Just to give you an idea of the way that we also diagnose disorders, there's a lot of these behaviors that will overlap. And as you mentioned, there are specific criteria that we use in order to be able to diagnose a disorder. So for any given disorder, you'll have a range of 10 or 15 different types of behaviors. And as you mentioned, there's only 5 or 6 or 7 of them that might be required. Now, if you really think about it, there are so many different combinations of behaviors that a person can have, and what that looks like for just the vast types of behaviors you'd be able to see under one specific umbrella of mental health disorders. So imagine trying to characterize the essence of a mental health disorder when it's just so vast in behaviors as well. So I think you raise excellent points, which also contribute to this whole discussion of, are we really getting to the essence or the cause of mental health disorders? Because at this point, we're still in the process of trying to find the proper definition of these disorders, truthfully.
Yeah. So I guess that would be like asking you what causes mountains and you having to say, well, we haven't defined what a mountain is just yet.
You have it. There you go. Yes, we have a general idea. We have an understanding of it. And to be quite truthful, psychiatry is almost at a crossroads where we don't really know what is the most important contribution. Is it more the biomedical model that we should be focusing on? Is it more the psychosocial model that we should be focusing on? Is it an intersection of the two? What's the contribution of each? So the subjective perspective of an individual and the way that they're living their illness, this phenomenological perspective, should it also be incorporated into the way that we view diagnoses? Because some individuals, they might experience a mental illness at a much larger or smaller degree, even though they have the same types of behaviors. So psychiatry also has to incorporate that subjective aspect of quality of life and going about life and how they're feeling on a day-to-day basis. So I think psychiatry still is in its infancy, despite the amount of information that we've collected. But at this point, we almost don't know what we don't know, which is why we're still trying to strive for better every day. It's not to invalidate everything that we've done so far. It just goes to show that we have learned so much that now we've reached a point that we feel like we know nothing, almost echoing what Socrates said thousands of years ago. We're going in a direction. Which direction it is, we're not quite sure at the moment, but we're getting there. That's all we know.
That's really cool. So you mentioned like the people with these mental health issues and their experiences. And I think it's important to talk about how there's a lot of misinformation and stigma surrounding mental illnesses and people with mental illnesses. The way the media we watch generally portrays people with mental illnesses is sensationalized and not necessarily accurate. So, what should I and my viewers know about people who struggle with mental illnesses like schizophrenia, addiction, and suicidal ideation?
I think some of the most important concepts to remember is just that mental illness is more often than not invisible, and to really truthfully understand the impact of mental health conditions on individuals. I would look for two sources. Either you could look for independent peer-reviewed articles or even books written by prominent researchers in the field that have written about specific conditions, which would give you a greater understanding of a more scientific perspective. But I think it's also important to seek out individuals who have either experienced mental illness or are experiencing currently, to also get a better understanding of their obstacles, but also be humbled by the amount of courage it takes them to get through most of their days. So that's what I would probably suggest for your viewers.
If any of our viewers have friends or family members struggling with these illnesses, how can we help and support people in our lives who we love who are struggling with these things?
That is an excellent question. And I think that the best way to answer it is to ask them directly, what is the best way to support them? Because each individual will experience it differently, and each individual will require different amounts of help. Some individuals will prefer something that's more of a check-in, that's very rapid and just feels like there's a sense of connection at some point. Others will require more active communication or more active support. And really the best way is to give them a safe space for them to be able to explore the feelings that they're experiencing, or provide them the resources or the support to be able to find it elsewhere, whether it's through therapy or pharmacology or other non-psychopharmacotherapy types of treatments. So to really just work in conjunction with the person that is experiencing the mental health illness and find the best way to support them.
Okay. So let's move on to hopefully a slightly happier topic. Your specific research. Could you tell me a bit about the specific research projects you're currently working on?
Of course, the umbrella that I'm mostly focused on is neuroimaging data. So I conduct MRI scans on healthy patients as well as schizophrenia patients that are experiencing comorbid health disorders, which means that they're experiencing more than one mental health issue. And what I like to do is I like to see the brain differences that are occurring in these individuals with these multiple mental health conditions. So the first project that I'm working on is the clozapine project. So we have multiple sets of individuals that are either responding well to typical schizophrenia, antipsychotic medication. We have another group of patients that don't respond to typical antipsychotic medication. So these are typically called treatment-resistant schizophrenia patients, and they're often given the what they call the end-of-the-line treatment, which is clozapine. Now, this medication is an excellent medication, and it is underutilized in pharmaceutical areas. The problem is that it comes with some important side effects. We're trying to see if the benefits will outweigh the negatives. So how we're approaching this is by looking at some of the wonderful neuroimaging data that is going to give us insight on whether there are certain brain circuits that are being rectified following clozapine treatment. So if you take clozapine, do you seem to have less emotional disturbance? Do you seem to have less difficulty with your social environment? Do you seem to have less problems with substance abuse? Do you seem to have less issues with suicide? And does it show on a neurobiological level as well? So that's what we're really trying to disentangle. So yes, we're absolutely trying to support the use of clozapine more frequently in psychiatric practice, but we're also trying to back it up with the important clinical as well as neuroimaging data. So that's one of the projects that I'm working on. And the second project that I'm working on is using virtual reality therapy to be able to help treatment-resistant schizophrenia patients for whom medication does simply not work. We want to be able to give them another way or another type of treatment that might be able to help them. So typically for this project, which is some cutting edge research, actually, it's really new in the field. So the schizophrenia patients will recreate their hallucinations in virtual reality and will be able to have conversations with these voices in a therapy session. And the psychologist that is supporting this session will be giving the schizophrenia patient the tools that they require to kind of fight back against these negative voices or these negative hallucinations. So that way the patient feels empowered, feels like they're able to better manage their symptoms. And at the end of the day, really just improves the amount of hallucinations that they have, their quality of life. And it just gives them a way to also be able to manage with everything that they're going through as well. This project has been repeated several times, and we find positive response rates for a lot of our patients. This time, of course, since I'm on the project, we're adding the neuroimaging component, which means that we're also looking to see what brain circuits are being corrected after this avatar therapy. How is their brain changing for the better? That's what we're focusing on.
Sorry, that's just really cool. I'm still processing a little.
Yeah.
How do you interpret these neural imaging scans to determine that brain circuitry is being fixed? Like, explain it to me like I'm 5 years old.
Yes. Okay. We have several groups to be able to compare what a baseline would look like. So we have a group of healthy patients, and we're saying, okay, this is what a quote unquote healthy or typical or neurotypical brain should look like. Then we compare it to the schizophrenia patients that are about to start therapy. So we are able to make a comparison of saying, okay, this is what is wrong or atypical in the schizophrenia brain that seems to have certain deficits in particular areas in activity and connectivity. Because you have certain brain regions that might be working on their own, but you also have the connection between the different brain regions. Now, what we do is we then compare before therapy what it looks like, and then after therapy what it looks like. And we're trying to see what regions and what connective activity is happening that's different before therapy and after therapy. And that's how we're able to really pinpoint what exactly is going on. Do we see better emotion regulation or better activity in emotion regulation, I would say? Do we see better connectivity between the frontal area and the back area? What exactly is going on? And to be quite frank, we still have yet to discover that because virtual reality therapy is quite new. So this is all going to be groundbreaking, to say the least. It hasn't been implemented yet. We're using it also on another project. We're looking to see if this type of therapy could also be used for individuals that experience addiction issues, notably cannabis use disorder, and we seem to also get positive feedback from those kinds of studies. So all in all, I think virtual reality therapy will probably become something that's going to be integrated in the toolbox for psychologists. Whether or not it's going to be the front line, it's hard to say at this point, but hopefully it will be integrated into our system to be able to be offered to these types of patients.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that something like virtual reality therapy would have fewer side effects than a drug, since it's talk therapy rather than trying to change your brain chemistry.
Yes, absolutely. It is definitely one of the positives. We're currently also conducting a cost benefit evaluation to see whether or not there's going to be a positive outcome for that aspect as well. We're moving towards an era of personalized and tailored medicine. And I think introducing this virtual reality therapy is going to be contributing to that outcome, simply because each therapy is going to be tailored specifically for that individual. Instead of giving a simple pill that might be able to try and rectify some type of issue somewhere in the brain of individuals, and we don't know if it's acting locally or specifically and how it's going about its actions. But to be quite frank, there's a lot of information on the pharmacology of drugs, so not to be ridiculously over exaggerating everything, but just to say that virtual reality therapy, we can now be able to target specific deficits, see them on an MRI before and afterwards, and be able to support patients in their journey towards better health. So that's what we're hoping to achieve.
I really like that goal of individualized treatment, since you just spent several minutes talking about how each mental health issue is different and each patient with each mental health issue is different. And 5 out of 15 symptoms, you could have 3 different patients all with the same disorder, all with no overlapping symptoms. So
Exactly.
that individualized approach seems apt. So we just talked a bit about your current research projects. Do you have any past research projects that you were especially proud of, or any funny stories from your career?
I have too many to count. Most of them didn't start off as funny. Most of them were quite sad. And I found myself in the bathroom crying on a couple of occasions. But now that I look back at them, I do think that they're hilarious. Some of the most, I think one of the projects I'm most proud of was probably the MedSafer project that I was working on. So for this one, I had just finished my master's degree and I was looking for a job. And I ended up finding this program that was offered at the Montreal General Hospital called the MedSafer Project. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the elderly population is often over-medicated and their medication lists aren't revised as often as they should be, which means that they're placed on medications for long periods of time when they should be either off those medications or switched onto something different. Now, there are a couple of researchers that were able to put together a project where they created an algorithm that would look at elderly patients' prescriptions and make recommendations of whether or not they should be either off a specific medication or switched onto something else. And I think it was one of the first times where I was able to see the direct impact of research on patient care and being able to converse with these patients. As a research assistant, I was supposed to spend the least amount of time as possible, but unfortunately, I spent the most amount of time with these patients because I was so fascinated by their life stories. When we started actually talking about them, there's one woman who created dresses for the Supremes. There's another individual that was a chemist for about 60 years of his life. There's another woman, she had dementia, but she was a woman that was a director for a very prominent center here in the arts department in Canada. And it was just so amazing. And I was absolutely humbled to see these incredible figures and for me to be standing almost on the same level. I didn't feel like I should be. I was proud of the research aspect. I was proud of the links I was able to create with these individuals. And even though I was on the project for a very short time, I feel like I was almost the most fulfilled with this project. So all in all, I think that was probably the most impactful experience that I've had so far.
That's so nice.
I know it might not be research oriented, but it's the truth. And when my background was so heavily focused on science for so long, and I was working with rats and with mice and with immunoassays and stainings and so many things, you often forget the humanistic aspect of research, and being able to reconnect with that was immensely, I find my words in French, but it was immensely fulfilling for me.
It sounds very fulfilling to be able to finally see the humans on the other side, the people that you're helping, and realize that all of this science, all of this research is actually going to help people. Seeing the real world applications must be wonderful.
They truly are, and they make every single difficult aspect of research worth it. I mean, you were talking about funny stories, but oh God, there was, if you don't mind, I'll go into it a bit.
Oh, please tell the funny
But
story.
when I was conducting research back at McGill University, I was looking to see the contribution of the immune system in drug addiction. And what we see in drug addiction oftentimes is that there's a suppression of the immune system with chronic addiction, at least with cocaine addiction. So we wanted to see, well, hey, if we can reinitiate that immune system response, are we able to dampen some of the symptoms or behaviors that we see in drug addiction? So in order to do this project, we used a rat model where the rats would self-administer cocaine. And at the very beginning of my study, I had to estimate the amount of immune reactant agents to purchase before going ahead with the study. And of course, I had done some preliminary studies on it, and I came up with a specific number that I needed to order. Unfortunately, what I didn't know, because I'd never worked with these cocaine populations, is that the animals would gain a significant amount of weight by the time I would be ready to trigger the immune response. And so it was Christmas time, everything had shut down. The company no longer offered the agents, and I had trained my animals for about 4 months, spent thousands of dollars, and I was missing my reagent to reactivate the immune system. So I'll never forget how many days I spent calling different companies to try to find someone that would be able to make that reagent for me. I finally succeeded, thankfully, and I didn't have to tank the entire experiment. But that taught me to run a project all the way to the end before you make any kind of assumption. And I will remember that until the day that I die.
So you spent thousands of dollars to get mice addicted to cocaine. And then your plan was to try to kickstart their immune systems. But you didn't realize, does cocaine use lead to weight gain in humans? I didn't realize that.
I never looked it up, nor did I think it was going to be a side effect. And the most interesting aspect is that we also food restricted these animals on a specific regime. So there was no way in my mind that these animals were going to be, sometimes, I'm not kidding you, Astra, some of these ended up weighing twice their original size. And it was mind-boggling to me. So I had a lot of explaining to do to my supervisor, and I'm so glad he was very understanding because he also had no idea of this minor side effect.
I mean, you had already gotten him on board with the, hey, let's get some coked up mice.
Yeah.
I can see that your advisor is chill and would be like, oh, yeah, no, not realizing that they'd gain weight is totally legit. Let's get some more reagents.
Yes. So at the end of the day, I mean, the whole aspect of research is being able to troubleshoot, figure out these problems, and find ways to solve them. And I think that is the most important lesson that any grad student will learn. There is not a single project that ever goes as planned, ever. I've worked in 12 labs so far, and not a single time has anything ever gone flawlessly. And grad school will prepare you to be resilient, will prepare you to be a critical thinker, will prepare you to take on anything and look at it from different perspectives. And even though you feel like you're being sliced into tiny different versions of yourself and spread everywhere in your life, at the end of it, you come out to be such an incredible individual. And I wouldn't change my experience for anything.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the thing you said about critical thinking and learning how to troubleshoot. I know that definitely one of the lessons from college that I actually use day to day is every time I see like a headline that talks about a breaking discovery, chocolate cures cancer, like one of those ridiculous clickbait headlines, I immediately go to the original and check out their methods section, because I know from experience and from the experience of every person in science I know that Sample size matters, methods matter, and sometimes a 2% higher correlation can be misinterpreted by somebody trying to sell clicks.
Amazing. And if I can give something to this world before I die, I would love to potentially instill some critical thinking types of programs for our high school students. People do not know how to critically analyze a paper. Do you look at the introduction? Do you look at the methods? Do you look at what aspect is the most important? People don't understand that you have to look at the journal that it's published in. Look at your sample size, look at the methodology, look when it was published, look at the types of stats that they're using, look at the way that they're interpreting the information. Is it accurate, and does it authentically reflect what they're saying with their stats? What conclusions are they coming to? There are so many different aspects that you need to look at and investigate. And you also need to have a certain amount of prior knowledge to be able to discern whether or not, hey, this is off, or, oh, this is correct. There's just so much to learn, and you genuinely don't know what you don't know. So being able to find a program that's going to teach kids or adults how to look at something critically so they can apply it to their day-to-day basis and not be conned by these clickbait titles, I think is going to be something extremely important, especially as we progress with more internet access, more free speech, less oversight on what's being said, what is being, there's these alternate truths, alternate facts that are going around. And I'll never forget, I was applying years ago, I think in 2016 or something, for the council, the Youth Scientific Council of Canada. And the question they had asked us is, what do you think is going to be the most problematic issue that is going to come out in the next 5 to 10 years? And I wrote about misinformation because I had a feeling that people that have access to a vast basin of knowledge but do not have the tools to sift through it is going to be a deadly combo. And with COVID, we've seen just that.
And misinformation, like you mentioned, it feeds COVID conspiracies, it feeds climate change denials, it feeds flat Earth. I'm not sure if that's big in Canada, but here in America,
it is huge too. Here, it's just quieter because people don't seem to speak of it as often. But let me tell you, if you look at the polls, it is just as rampant here. Yeah.
Here in America, evolution is a hoax and the Earth is flat.
Yes. Oh God. Yes. Yeah.
I also think that scientists should be a little more honest. Like everyone says, well, go to the peer-reviewed studies. And yes, peer-reviewed is better than like someone's blog, but not all peer review is equal. And honestly, I'm gonna get smited by the gods of academia for this, but some blogs are more reliable than some academic journals because pay-to-play academic journals are often not peer-reviewed. I mean, I've seen parody academic articles. Like there was one that was just "take me off your mailing list" repeated like several thousand times, and it got published. The guy was trying to make a point. So there is that end of the spectrum of academic journals, and there are also blogs written by scientists that are like from professors who are like researching and saying, okay, here's this paper I published. Here is my outreach version of this paper. So it's really hard to determine what's legit science and what's clickbait because so many news outlets can either misinterpret or sensationalize a result because of the process of grant writing. Like you only get funded if people agree to give you money. A lot of scientists have the incentive to sensationalize their own results. And I think science deserves to be sensationalized, but sometimes it goes a little too far and gets into that misinformation territory. So
I do think that there is definitely a give and take, and you make excellent points. I don't believe that all peer review fall to the same standard. You'll have politics that also come into play with peer review. If one journal publishes a paper that isn't up to standard with the rest of the journal, simply because this editor-in-chief decided to publish a paper with someone else, it might pass more easily. Whereas, I mean, this happened to me actually with one of my first publications. I submitted it to a first journal and they outright rejected it because they had no idea who we were. And we ended up going to a second publication and they accepted it with tiny minor edits. And you're looking at a journal that has identical impact factors and same outreach, and you're saying to yourself, why would you find experts that would say that it shouldn't be published and other experts that say yes, absolutely?
Yep.
And it's just hilarious because the reason they outright rejected it is because they originally said that we didn't have a high enough sample size, yet 2 months prior they published a paper with the exact same sample size.
Yep.
But one of the individuals on the paper was the editor-in-chief. So it's not to say that looking at peer review is going to be the foolproof method to find reliable information. I think having prior knowledge and an understanding of the field is key, but also being able to look at meta-analyses. Mm-hmm. If people are genuinely interested in looking at peer-reviewed information, look for meta-analyses or systematic reviews that take into account the entire amount of literature in that particular field with that particular question and evaluates the overarching pattern. That's where you're going to be able to really find resound information, at least the strongest in the scientific field. Single studies oftentimes are not strong enough to report specific effects unless they're quite large in size. And even at that point, you fall into the trap of just having big data bias, just because you have a lot of people included that you end up having significant results. So again, these are all pieces of information that scientists are wary of at the back of their minds when they're reading articles or sifting through information that individuals that don't have a scientific background might not have. So it's one of the reasons why we say work in conjunction with scientists and doctors, but also make decisions for yourself after you've looked at the literature.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with the look at literature review papers. I know that for my videos, when I'm not entirely familiar with the topic and I want to do some lit review, the first place I'll go is these, I call them lit review papers in my mind. I'm not sure if that's what they're called. I'll also just find dozens of papers and read the introductions and see who they cite. So how does your specific research fit into the overall field of mental health?
Oh, that is an excellent question. It's not going to change the facet of mental health. I think we're going to be able to answer one of the million questions that we still have to answer. If we can take this data and improve someone's quality of life, if we can take this data and present it in such a way where people that have these different disorders feel heard, feel seen, feel validated, I think we've done a very good job. If it doesn't apply into these two categories, then I'm not really sure what's the point of doing this research. But hopefully by the time we finish this, these are the two objectives that I want to see happen with the research that we're doing.
I like that. You're not planning on revolutionizing the field, but you are planning on making real people's quality of life a lot better.
Absolutely.
Now that we've talked a bit about your research and the field of mental health, let's talk about you personally and your personal journeys. So I stalked you on LinkedIn before this, as I do with all of my interviewees. So you did your undergrad in psychology, then got a master's degrees in neuroscience and public health, and you have a graduate certificate in business administration. Now you're getting your PhD in psychiatry. You also have both hospital and industry experience. I guess my question is, do you approach getting degrees in the same way my wife and I approach streaming TV shows? And if so, what's next on your recommendeds?
Oh God, yes, I often get that. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I genuinely love learning. I would do it for the rest of my life. I am one of those crazy people that never want to retire. I want to find a job that makes me so happy to wake up in the morning, and I'll never want to give it up. And even if I do end up giving it up, I will probably do volunteer work until I don't wake up in the morning. And it's the truth. And I think everyone will spend the rest of their life learning in different settings. Some people will take it more seriously than others, but I am going to dedicate the rest of my life to gaining as much knowledge as possible, whether it be in a professional setting or in an academic setting. And I think I'm worth it. I think I'm worth working hard for. And I think I should become the best public health specialist or psychiatric researcher that there can be. And that means that my learning will never stop. So for me, it's not about getting the degrees, about getting the stupid titles. I couldn't care less about those. What I want to know is all the information that everyone else has. And once I gain that information, I want to be able to disseminate it to everyone else, because I want everyone to share that same amount of knowledge as I do. And I mean, when I was younger, I wanted to be a teacher. If that doesn't come through with all the information that I'm telling you right now.
Just a little.
Yeah. And my lifelong dream was to be a chemistry teacher. I absolutely loved it. It was my passion in life. And you're going to laugh, because the one thing that prevented me from becoming a chemistry teacher was physics. I could never understand physics for the life of me. I would do problems at night. I would cry myself to sleep at night, and in the morning I would cry on my way to do the exams. And they told me that if I wanted to become a chemistry teacher, I would need to take more physics classes. And I gave up my dream and I went into psychology instead. And I guess, yeah, life just brought me on a different path, and I was just as fortunate to go on this path as well. So what's next for me? If I tell you I have 5 other degrees lined up, you would probably believe me.
Yeah.
I'm looking to do either a postdoc. I'm looking to maybe go into becoming a physician assistant. I'm looking to potentially do another PhD, maybe this time in public health. There are an infinite amount of options. I think my husband is going to kill me if we run out of money before I get all the degrees that I want to. But I think what's important is that each time that I do end up getting a degree, I go back into the field to be able to apply the information that I've used, gain more knowledge in that professional development, and then say, okay, now that I have both perspectives, let me reorient myself and see what I want to specialize in more, and then go further deep into that particular area. And I think I'm almost finding myself going through all of these degrees. I'm finding all the different facets of me, and learning to love health education, learning to love neuroscience, learning to love psychiatry. And it's almost a personal relationship that I have with myself, which is also one of the reasons why I'm continuing with so many degrees. So I think it's multifaceted, to say the least, but those are the ones that are most likely to be next on my list. Yeah.
I really related to that answer, because I'm no longer collecting degrees, but I did my undergrads in physics and theater, and then got a master's in mechanical engineering.
Amazing.
I very much relate to your just seeing a shiny thing and wanting to learn and going, that.
Yes.
That's exactly what I do. Let's move on to talking about your volunteering and outreach, because you are in so many organizations. Just to name a few, you're the program director for the Math and Science Infinity Quebec program, which is part of the Society for Canadian Women in Science and Technology, which is a program that promotes science literacy in underserved communities. You're also the president of the Association. You're the president of the Association Estudiante en Sciences Biomedicales Aus. You're gonna have to say it. I apologize.
Yes, it's the Biomedical Science Graduate Student Association. Yes.
That. You're president of that. You're also a founding member of the Quebec chapter of the Society for Canadian Women in Science and Technology. And I really like that all of these outreach organizations also seem to have a tinge of activism attached and a tinge of like promoting diversity in STEM. So first off, let's talk about these outreach organizations, and then let's just chat about science outreach and diversity in STEM in general.
Absolutely. It's quite hilarious how I just ended up falling on a web page for the Society for Canadian Women in Science and Technology, which is also called SQUIST. It was just a random day, and I was hoping to find other women that were in a similar situation as me, where they find themselves to be in either male dominant fields or in places where their friends are not necessarily in the science domain, and they're just really looking for their tribe. And so one day I just spent some time on the internet looking for maybe other women that are in science, and I ended up on SQUIST. And little did I know that this society regroups about 1,000 women across Canada. We're all in different fields of STEM. And our main goal is really to promote women in these STEM fields. And we ended up having a fireside, as they call it. So they didn't have a Quebec chapter at this time. Most of their action was particularly in Vancouver. That's where they're based. And so they have about 400 or 500 of their members just in the Vancouver/BC area. And during this fireside, we ended up just being a couple of women, just trying to get to know each other to see, hey, should we really end up founding this chapter in Quebec? Do you think that there's going to be a need for it? And we took our chance. We decided to found this particular chapter. It was myself, it was a physicist that went back to go get her law degree. And we also have a tenured professor in toxicology and parasitology. And the three of us together decided to go forward and create an inaugural event back in February of last year. Lo and behold, we had about 150 people attend this event, and we had no idea that there was such a need or a desire to be able to implement this kind of society within our province. And so that really propelled us forward to say, okay, what are the most important needs that we need to be able to deliver to our communities? And one of them is being able to provide mentorship opportunities for the girls in either underserved communities or in vulnerable positions, but also to provide specific services where we're going to be able to promote science literacy in also underserved communities. So these are the two programs that we're currently building right now with our coordinators to be able to eventually serve in the next couple of months or so. We already had 2 events in the past, or we had kind of like a science expedition with some schools where they were able to each day have a different activity to complete. And by the end of the week, it kind of had an overarching theme, and it was a wild success. And we're getting more and more requests for these types of activities. And so for the moment, we're really just trying to build from this momentum. Eventually, we're going to be expanding to more programs. However, we're just trying to focus our efforts for this in the moment. Before getting into SQUIST, I had done a lot of my own work. And because I loved neuroscience, I told myself everybody must love neuroscience. So I ended up creating a neuroscience program for high school kids. But I did it in such a way that it was relevant to them. So I would come into school and I would teach them about the brain and love. So when they're in relationships, what happens to their brain? Or the adolescent brain and drugs, the adolescent brain and stress, the adolescent brain and sleep deprivation. And I would always try to turn it in such a way of, hey, let's learn a little bit about yourself and why you're the way that you are. And how can you use this information to make sure that your day-to-day is more fulfilling or more reflective of what you want out of life. And that was a nice wild success. So we're trying to integrate that as well into the Society for Canadian Women in Science. But all this to say that I love knowledge and I love disseminating knowledge. And the rest of my life, I'm going to be spending trying to do that same feat. It's a lot like science communications. It's just in a very, I think, a particular subset of it. You're doing it through your podcasts. I will probably do it in live. But that's more of my work with SWIST. With the Graduate Student Association, I would have to say that it's also quite new. It was only founded in 2017. So there were a lot of things that still needed building. So we did a lot of the admin stuff. We tried to create some opportunities for the students to be able to either link with past students that graduated, We gave them options to be able to link with faculties that offered them special services because it was in the time of COVID. So we wanted to be able to help them get through from a psychological aspect, from an administrative aspect, any way that we can support them. We we constructed actually bursaries to be able to give to a specific subset of individuals that were in dire need for financial help. So we really tried to focus on what were the needs of our society to be able to help them through those kinds of difficulties that they were facing. So in general, sometimes I look back at things that I've done and I genuinely wonder how I'm able to do all these things. And on paper, it looks like a lot, but really, if you only sleep 5 hours a night and you work 7 hours a day, it's all doable. But that's the thing. You got to be able to work like that 10 hours a day, but it doesn't feel like work. And that's what I genuinely hope for everyone, is for them to find their passion, find what they love, and be able to do it every single day. And not everyone gets that opportunity. And it's genuinely a privilege. And I want to continue using that privilege to be able to uplift those around me that don't have that privilege yet, but I'm working on it. And that's what I'm working towards.
I really like the way you phrase that, because I think it's so important that when we acknowledge that we are people with privilege, that privilege isn't a bad thing. The goal is that everybody has that privilege. Everybody should get all of the benefits that we had. And I think it's so important that when we're fighting to make a more equitable and just society, that we fight to add privileges and we fight to uplift others rather than frame it as like knocking everyone down to the same level, but rather lifting everyone up to the same level.
Oh, absolutely. And I think an important concept to have is, once you find your place at the table, make sure to create enough space for another person to be able to place that chair for them as well. There have been so many barriers for us to be able to get to the point to where we are today. And for us to just sit there and acknowledge the privilege and just profit from it without actually doing anything to make sure that no one else has to face those barriers or face other barriers that we're not even aware of, or that we will never be able to comprehend, is just unimaginable to me. So, and it kind of relates back to the question of why should we even push diversity in STEM? And isn't that the $1 million question? We're trying to get to that same point. But if we really think about it, being able to introduce other people into the equation, being able to have different perspectives to add richness and depth to the amount of research that we're doing, lead to higher quality research and innovation in our fields, have a higher degree of collaboration and support, have a higher degree of openness, rectifying the current structural dominance that we find in cis white populations. These are all things that we should strive for, because working together, we're going to achieve a collective benefit from it. It's not because you have to dim someone else's light for your light to be even brighter. We all need to achieve that same brightness so that we can light up the entire world. And that's the way that I see it.
Let's assume that we're not taking it as a given that more diverse people in STEM is just a good thing. Let's say we're not taking it as a moral imperative and a duty. Let's look at how it affects the sciences. Like, science fields are made better with different perspectives. For example, the fields of medicine still have a huge gender bias issue because there weren't women in medicine and women weren't considered. They still have a lot of gaps in terms of queer people. There are still loads of racist things taught in medical textbooks because people of color just weren't consulted. It's so important to get diversity in science just for science to be better. And every field of science, even the physical sciences, and almost especially the physical sciences, because they're less aware of it, are molded by the societies of the time. So if you have a racist society and all of the scientists have these racist ideas, the science they do is going to be informed and shaped by racism. One of the other scientists I interviewed in a previous video, everybody go check out my interview with Freddie Purnell. He talks about this at length. Science itself is improved by having a diversity of voices. And that's completely ignoring the fact that everyone should get to be a scientist if they want. Like, keeping people out of science is just bad. Having more people who are science literate is a good thing. Having more trust of science is a good thing. Like, why do you think we have anti-vaxxers? It's because people don't trust scientists.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself, genuinely speaking. And for people that are interested in that whole spirit of the time, you should look at Kuhn's work on paradigm shifts in science. That is an excellent read. It's very short. I think it's about 150 pages, but a very, very good read, which would give you a general understanding of how science is in fact shaped by the era of the time, which is the zeitgeist. So just a little side note on that. Sorry about that.
Send me the link and I'll put it below when I upload the video.
Excellent. You got it.
So what advice would you have for any young women who are considering pursuing science, but they're not really sure that it's the right fit for them, or they don't really see themselves as a scientist?
For anyone out there who is questioning themselves, I think that you should have a lot more confidence that you have in yourself right now. And if I can give you one piece of advice for you to keep for the rest of your lives, I want you to never talk yourselves out of rooms that you deserve to be in. You are strong, you are capable, and you are smart, and do not let anyone tell you otherwise. And that is my advice to you.
Aww. Thank you so much to Maria Athanassiou for dropping by and teaching us all about mental illnesses and about the importance of outreach and diversity in STEM. Have a great day, and remember that science is a process. Bye!
Astra, to the stars, to the stars.
Let's skip the advice section, because if you're anything like me, I don't know if we're qualified to give advice to normal people with normal goals.
Probably not.
So
yeah, that's the thing. It's just we fall into a special category of special. So yeah. I try to mentor high school girls, but it's like I usually pick out the ones that are like very, very ambitious. I want to do very specific things, and everyone else I just like fall on deaf ears. So it's, you know, it's tough.
Yeah, hopefully this video will be seen by some high school, like some overly ambitious high school student who just wants to study everything.
We believe in you. You can do it.
You're gonna do it.